Well, I wanted to kick off in today's news with the subject, of course, of Ukraine, but really the tragedy of Ukraine. And I think this is one of the most appalling things of this war, that the Western public are simply not being told the true suffering of the Ukrainians in what is clearly now a proxy war for NATO. So let's put up this first image here, which I think is very poignant. We've essentially got rows and rows of flags, and these represent killed in action on the Ukrainian side. I do not believe that these represent all of the problems in all of those killed in Ukraine, because cemeteries are overflowing, and there's been a lot of unhappiness about the fact that soldiers killed couldn't receive proper burials due to problems with the cemeteries themselves. But let's just think about this. Each flag is a soldier killed in action. These are just some of the total deaths. And the BBC, the UK Ministry of Defence, simply not talking about Ukrainian casualties. Now, I'm putting the 350,000 estimated dead on screen. It is an estimated figure, but those analysing the war towards the front are coming up with these very big figures, much bigger than anything that we're hearing in the legacy media, but also deaths in the counter-offensive have been climbing and climbing. And a figure of 45,000 estimated is also being mentioned amongst social media. So I'm not saying these are correct. What I am saying is it's clear that vast numbers of Ukrainians are being killed. But at the moment, the BBC, the UK Ministry of Defence, Western media simply doesn't want to talk about this. But what will they talk about? Well, the fact that more weapons, ammunition, and now Western troops are going to be put into Ukraine to keep this proxy war and the death going. And if we think about the reality of it, of course, if people are being killed on the battlefield, many others are being maimed. We've seen this with British troops in more localised conflicts. But the tragedy is that people are going to be losing limbs. How many people have lost limbs? We have no idea. Again, analysts on social media are suggesting the numbers could be up at 200,000, and this could be realistic, depending on the numbers killed in action. But what's happening in the background? Well, we've got the West prosthetics industry embedding itself in Ukraine, and they're doing all they can, they say, to help, but also that this is a training opportunity and a technical investigation opportunity for high-tech prosthetics. This is part of comment on social media over the weekend, and it says that there are already hundreds and thousands of people who've lost their limbs, and the estimates here from 200,000 to 500,000. Now, again, I'm not saying these are correct. I'm simply saying, why is it that the West refuses to talk about the tragedy in Ukraine? And the comment here also says, take one example. One German company, Ottobock, was officially contacted by 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers for prosthetics. So this is basically very sad, it's tragic, and of course we simply do not know the true scale of suffering. Now, David, you and I had a little bit of a conversation earlier this morning about what the true numbers of killed in action. What that true number is, we don't know. But what we do know that Ukrainians and Russians are dying on this battlefield, and Western media simply doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, this is true. I mean, the figures we don't know, and one of the things that makes it very hard to interpret what's happening here is the lack of any on any side about what the actual figures are. I understand that the basic size of the Ukrainian army is about 500,000, and the Russians started with almost 3 times that number if you add on all the reserves. So some of the figures that are bandied around seem far too high to me, but what we do know is the casualties have been huge. They have been sufficient to really affect how the fighting, the tactics have changed in order men and cut the casualty numbers, because the casualty numbers have clearly been totally unsustainable. So what we're getting is a much longer process of attritional warfare, with no immediate end in sight. And as we've mentioned many times, no initiative from any side, certainly not from the West, looking to end this.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that, David. Well, let's just add some other comment around the war. Well, one of the things that's being talked about is Western war fatigue, and I think this is clearly correct, that we're now seeing on the Western side, on the NATO side, countries tiring of the amount of money, effort, and of course lives that this war is sucking up. But the money continues to be pumped in. And the figures here from the BBC just show us vast amounts of money, billions of US dollars, billions of from the UK and Germany as well, all going into continuing the war. This was posted through to me over the weekend, which I wasn't aware of, and I find it extraordinary that we've now got Marina Abramović being asked to be an ambassador for Ukraine. Was she the right woman? Well, maybe we would say she is through some of her particularly vile artwork, but this seems to be an extraordinary development in what's happening in the war. Meanwhile, we come to the Sunday Telegraph for a really extraordinary front page. This is what it looked like yesterday. And of course, what we've got is the claim that it was Mr. Shapps himself who apparently made a decision to send UK troops into Ukraine. But if we analyse the front page, we've got the serious news in this left-hand column. But on the right, we've got a distracting, unconnected photo of the Prime Minister and his wife en route to the Conservative conference. So basically, even though we've got now bona fide information that British military personnel are going into Ukraine, the paper says that it was previously been claimed that up to 50 British personnel were there amongst Western special forces earlier this year, a matter that the government would never discuss publicly. So who made the decision to get those troops into Ukraine? Was it discussed in Parliament? Why wasn't the UK public informed? And if we follow on through that, a lot of propaganda in that Sunday Telegraph paper. Here we've got everything from the bravery of Ukrainian troops rescuing their comrades from behind the lines to Russia in a threat to annex more regions. And here we've got the Wagner mercenaries are intent on reigniting civil war in Mali. So very, very obvious that the Telegraph is hammering the Russians. They are the people to blame. But this one really took the biscuit because I found it so, I think filthy is the word, that apparently some photographers who used to use drones to take film and video of weddings are now using that to target Russians on the battlefield. And this article contains this quote: "Sometimes we guard artillery strikes onto Russian position, and you will see 8 soldiers killed with wild pigs gathering round to eat the bodies afterwards. I'm afraid I have no mercy for them." So the Telegraph seems to have stooped to the absolute gutter in its reporting, but they're very excited. There's the possibility of British troops being involved in the Kosovo scandal as that grows. And the comment here was that NATO has confirmed that its peacekeeping force KFOR will be increasing its presence after a battle between police and armed Serbs turned a quiet village into northern Kosovo into a war zone. And lastly, if you think that the editorial was going to give you some information on the fact we're heading towards World War III, well, the Telegraph simply talked about the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and the fact that that nice Mr. Sunak was going to deal with the speed and traffic restrictions which are upsetting many people in the country. So extraordinary cognitive dissonance from the Telegraph, but also buried away on a couple of pages later was this, that the Navy is suggesting that people should use pronouns to introduce themselves. So we've got a serious woke agenda destroying the military in UK. And the Telegraph here using the same technique as on the front page because a completely unconnected photo was here on the right. So, David, bring you back in. We live in extraordinary times, and it's clear that we can't trust the legacy media to tell us the truth about, really, it seems, any of the important subjects.
Correct. The legacy media are ignoring the issues. They're not dealing with the big issues, such as the threat of a wider conflict. They are quite happy to follow the line that's being posted by the government. So they're not holding the government or the military-industrial complex to account. And it's going to come to alternative media to ask the questions and to raise the issues, because the mainstream, the Vichy media, are simply failing.
Yeah. Okay.